So proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting
I feel so official with the microphone. But thank you all for having me today. I love doing this talk. Bees are amazing, and I always start off with the story that I was horrified by bees as a child. Like if a bee came anywhere near me, I would scream and cry and run. And now they're some of my favorite creatures. So if you all don't like bees, maybe you will by the end of this talk. They are very, very vital creatures, as we will see. But again, my name is Julie. I've been with Allegheny Land Trust for almost 8 years now, running the education department. I think a lot of you are familiar with ALT. Who here is familiar with ALT? Yeah, our offices are like 3 blocks from here. If I didn't have so much stuff, I would have walked. But we've been around 31 years now, so it's a little younger than me, not quite, but we actually just closed on last Friday on another 210 additional acres, so that number is probably closer to 4,000 now, mostly in Allegheny County, but some in Butler and some in Washington as well. And I get to do the really fun stuff, so I get to do the education programs. Last year, we did 210 educational events and saw just shy of 8,000 people with our education programs. This year, we have already seen 3,000, and it's the first week of April, so we'll probably break 10,000, I'm willing to bet this year, people with our education programs. Anything from once a month free webinars to mushroom walks every month to campfire cooking classes, teacher workshops, sustainability workshops, a wide range of topics. If you want to learn more about ALT, who we are and what we do, over on that table against the wall, I've brought a brochure about ALT. I also have a flyer that lists all of our public events from April through June. And then I also have a sign-in sheet if you would like to be on our once-a-month newsletter to get you updated on when our events are, what properties we're closing on, interesting reads we're reading right now. So it's a nice newsletter to get yourself on if you like anything like this. So that will be over there. Please feel free to take some information here at the end of the talk. I also have a flyer on protecting native bees with some of the information we'll learn here today. All right, so why are we talking about bees? This is a mind-blowing statistic. Pennsylvania has more species of bees than birds. 437 species of bee and 414 birds. More bees than birds. How many types of bees can you name? Shout them out. Bumblebee, I heard. Honeybee.
Ground bee.
That's a general term for lots of different types of bees. That's a relative. Okay, so we got bumble and we got honey. He's a relative too. 2. We got 2 out of 437. So I have a feeling you guys are Like, when I was putting this together, when I was really starting to research and learn more about all the different types of bees, it was fascinating. There are over 200 species of just bumblebee in the US. So like we think of bumblebee, but no, there's like the rusty-belted bumblebee and the two-spotted bumblebee and like a whole ton of just bumblebees. In fact, there are so many bees, you can get a book on just identifying bumblebees. This book, which is about as thick as some of my college textbooks, although that was 20 years ago. This is a bee book, super thick, bees in your backyard. This is a fantastic resource. I'll leave this up here. Feel free to glance over that as well. But there are some really great bee resources out there for you to learn a little bit more about our 437 species of bees. But worldwide, there's over 20,000 species of bees, but only in 7 families. So it's not a massive group family-wise. There's a ton of species, but 7 groups. How many groups do you think we have here in Pennsylvania? How many of the 7 do we have?
2.
Someone said 2?
7.
Someone said 7?
1.
1? We have 6. So we have 6 of the 7 families of bees that are found worldwide. The only ones we don't have are specific to Australia. So we've got quite a bit of bee diversity here. These are closely related to wasps and ants. In fact, it is believed that wasps came first and then bees came second, and that bees evolved from wasps that naturally ingested pollen as they were eating insects, because most wasps are predatory, as they were eating insects that were covered in pollen on flowers. So wasps and then bees. So wasps are older than bees, but bees have been around 87 million years. Now, across those 20,000 species, they do have some things in common. To be a bee, you have to have certain things. All bees, no matter what kind of bee you are, have 3 body parts, compound eyes, chewing and sucking mouth parts. So they have both mouth parts. They have a mandible, which is their jaw, that we'll see a couple bee species here that really, really use that mandible. And then they also have the sucking proboscis, which is what we think of when we think of a butterfly that has like the curled tongue. So bees also have a proboscis because they are drinking a lot of nectar from the flowers. They all have 6 legs and 2 sets of wings. That's key because there are a ton of bee mimics out there, but the bee mimics will have 2 wings, bees have 4. So if you ever see a creature on your flowers and you think, is that a bee? I'm not sure. Count the wings. 4 wings, bee, 2 wings, something else. It's a fly, it's some sort of mimic beetle, it's something not a bee. Bees actually have pretty good senses. They can detect touch. They can also smell and taste, so they do have preferences for floral scents and for tastes. Some plants produce different types, like all plants produce different types of sugars, but they tend to prefer one sugar over another, so they will visit that plant because they can smell that difference. They can hear sounds via air movement. So can they hear words? No, but they can hear a generalized noise in their little bee ears. So they have pretty decent senses for an insect. We're gonna play a little bee game. And since we only got 2 bees, I'm a little concerned for you all. But we're gonna learn a lot today. It's all good. Okay, so true or false? The majority of bees are social and form hives. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Raise your hand if you think that's false. Okay, it's false. 90 to 95% of our bee species are solitary. Very few species form a true hive. Some are what's called eusocial, which means they form like a vague group to help raise the young. But the vast majority of bees, 90 to 95%, live alone and do not form any sort of colony, hive, group, nothing like that. Honeybees are an exotic species. Honeybees are an exotic species. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Raise your hand if you think that's false. Gosh darn, we're gonna learn today. Honeybees are Asian. I'm going to get on my honeybee tangent because I do every time I do this talk. Honeybees, when we say Western honeybee, that is Western Europe and Africa. There's an Eastern honeybee that is Eastern Asia. So Western does not mean Western Hemisphere. Western means western of its range, which is not past Africa. Now, the yellow indicates where it is now, but it is not natural. It is an introduced species, and we'll talk plenty about the honeybee. Most bees do not sting. Is that true? Raise your hand if you think it's true that most bees don't sting. Most bees do not sting. True? False? Who thinks it's false? Notice I'm not giving you an I don't know option. You have to pick one or the other. I strategically don't give you the I don't know option. That is true. So only female bees sting, and that is because the stinger is a modified ovipositor for egg laying. Males, you never laid eggs, so you never develop a stinger because you never had an ovipositor. So a stinger is that modified ovipositor, so no male bees across the board of any species sting. Don't even have a stinger, not an option. 4, there's only 5, so we're getting there. Bees visiting flowers are almost always female. Who thinks it's true that bees visiting flowers are almost always female? Who thinks that is false? It's true. This is probably the wrong audience for this talk, but male bees, you don't do a whole lot, I'm sorry to say. Male bees generally don't even feed themselves. So male honeybees don't feed themselves. They don't forage. They rely on the food that comes back from the females who are out foraging for food for the eggs. They eat that. They don't leave the hive ever. Their whole goal is to breed with the queen and they're done. Other species can feed themselves, but they are so short-lived that they generally don't feed much. So you most likely aren't going to encounter a male bee on a flower because they're only feeding themselves. So 1, they don't need that much food to begin with. And 2, they're so short-lived, they're not feeding that often in general. So 99% of the time, the bees you see on a flower are the female worker bees out gathering food for themselves and the young. Whether that's a hive or whether that's solitary, they still feed the young. They either feed them what's called a mass provision, where they gather all the food, they pile it in there and they leave it, or they take care of them as like a nurse bee would, and they come back and forth many times and feed the bees as they grow. So it's one or the other, but they're still out feeding the young. Males, you don't do any of that. Sorry. Last one. One honeybee, we'll say honey because very few species of bee make honey. It's only a couple, not many. You can't like go out and make a honey out of a bumblebee, right? They're not going to do that. One bee makes about half a pound of honey in its life. One honeybee makes about half a pound of honey in its life. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false? If you think it's false, is it more or less? Couple people say more, couple people say less. It is false, and it is less. So hold up your hand, get out your pinky finger, look at your pinky fingernail. That's about how much honey that one bee makes in its lifetime, enough to cover your pinky fingernail. That's why honey is so darn expensive, because it takes a ton of bees, a ton of time to produce that honey. So yeah, very, very little honey produced by individual bees. Who here's learning some stuff already? Y'all learning some stuff about bees? All right. All right. So bees of PA, like I said, we have 6 of the 7 species. The only one we're missing is the Australian family that is specific just to Australia. But look at all these types of bees. So we named 2. But those 2 are only in one family. We missed the other 5 families of bees. So our largest family is the Apidae. That's where we find our honeybees. There are 118 species just in that family. Honeybees and bumblebees, that's the 2 we got. Carpenter bees. I see a couple people like, oh yeah, I forgot that one. Carpenter bees. Long-horned bees. Heard of them? Squash bees. Digger bees, cuckoo bees, stingless bees, and orchid bees that we have in this family. Some new species of bees there for you? Lots of new species. Pelicidae is our sweat bees. There's a ton of sweat bees, 110 species of sweat bee. Andrenidae, mining bees. 100 species of mining bee. Those are our bees that like to dig down into the ground, hence their name mining, because they are going underground. My personal favorite, Megachilidae, are our leaf-cutting bees, mason bees, carder bees, and resin bees. And we're going to talk about all of these families and what that means and their characteristics. Melididae, there's only 4 species and they have no common names. That's kind of like the miscellaneous family of bees, of like, they didn't fit anywhere else, so we'll put them here. And then Coletidae, which is our plaster bees, cellophane bees, the adorable little masked bees, and forked tongue bees. Lots of different types of bees. Penn State Extension has a fantastic bee research lab. It's the Lopez Urib lab, and I linked it there, but I can also send that out to a couple folks if you want to disseminate the info. But this lab if you just type in Penn State Bee Lab, it'll pop right up. They have a list of every species in PA. That's where this graphic came from. And then you can click on it and see a picture of the bee and learn like all about them. So it's a really cool resource. Okay, so we're going to start with Apidae first, since that is our largest at 118 species. 5,700 species worldwide, every continent except Antarctica. These bees are all over the board. There's a lot of solitary, but there are some communal, and there are some truly social, which are our honeybees that form those hives. Now, to be truly social, you have to have bees that are multi-generational, and you have to have bees that have jobs. Those are the 2 ways you get yourself labeled as truly social. So in a honeybee hive, you've got your worker female bees, your queen bees, you've got drone bees, you've got nurse bees. So you've got a lot of different tasks happening in a beehive. And you also have multiple generations. So there will be 2 to 3 generations sometimes in that beehive. So truly social. They got a lot going on. The ones that are communal, what that means is generally the males aren't involved, sorry, but usually the females will nest close together and help raise each other's young. So it's just like a little community, exactly of that, of the female bees helping raise all of the eggs that they lay. These bees can be found anywhere from nesting in the ground, the hives, nesting in plant stems, and even in wood. This is why we tell people so often, leave the leaves and leave your yard squalor all winter and then don't remove it until the springtime, because 90 to 95% of bees are solitary. They're relying on things like your plant stems to nest in. So it's vital that you leave that stuff and provide that nesting habitat for them. Some of the species are kleptoparasites. That means they just go around stealing the food from somebody else who's harvested it. So we do have a little bit of thievery in the bee world as well. You also find a few crepuscular species in this family, which means crepuscular, they come out at dawn and dusk. So they're active very early in the morning and later in the evening than we're typically used to seeing bees. Normally we see bees flying in the middle of the day. This is also unfortunately where the killer bee comes in. The killer bee is a real thing. It is a hybrid of the honeybee and the East African honeybee. The East African honeybee is the one that's super aggressive, and it gets that killer bee connotation because it will chase people, which is a very rare thing in the bee world. Bees are generally like want nothing to do with us. They want to get as far away from us as possible. They certainly aren't going to seek us out, but those bees tend to be more aggressive. There's a little bit of diversity there. You can see we've got our little bumblebee here, we've got our honeybee in the middle, lots of different bees, stingless, carpenter, the big old fat carpenter bees are on this one. My dog loves the carpenter bees. He's old, and in his old age, he's developed a bee chasing habit, and the carpenter bees are about the only ones he can get because he's 13, and he doesn't see so well anymore, and bees are generally pretty fast, but he can get those carpenter bees. He will spend hours in the yard following carpenter bees around. All right, so we're gonna talk about honeybees. Honeybees aren't great. Honeybees are kind of the worst bee. And that is because they don't actually have a whole much of a skill set. So honeybees, they truly don't. They're not very talented as bees. They're all Eurasian, they're all South Asian. Eastern and Western honeybees are the only bees we've domesticated. So when we say save the bees, 9 times out of 10, it's a picture of a honeybee. We don't need to save that bee. We've domesticated it. We produce that bee by the trillions. We breed that bee and ship it on trucks across the country to pollinate things. We have plenty of honeybees. It's the native bees that are really suffering because those are not protected as much, those are not known as much. The honeybee was the first one you all knew. So when we say honeybee, we're referring to a non-native species and referring to a bee who actually did not exist and did not cross the Rocky Mountains in the US until the 1840s and 50s. Not a single crop grown here in the US depends on the honeybee for pollination because the crops were here first. So no crop that was developed here in the US relies on the honeybee. The honeybee came well after we started an agricultural society. Honeybees also lack something called a scopa. Now a scopa is essentially parts on their legs or abdomen that are specialized for holding pollen onto the body of the bee. Honeybees don't have that. So honeybees have no way of collecting all that pollen that our native bees do. And what's really cool about a lot of our native bees is their scopa is specialized to different plants because pollen does not all look the same. So I have here, these are 3D printed, obviously very large, molecules of pollen. This is pollen from a plant that we don't like very much. It makes us sneeze. This is a ragweed pollen. This is it's a native plant, but it gets in your garden. It's a really early bloomer. Kind of has like a whitish, kind of silvery leaf almost. Not a dandelion, this is goosefoot. This is from our goosefoot. It gets labeled as a weed because it grows in your gardens really quickly. We've got a goosefoot. This is from a native shrub. It's very small comparatively. They are size relevant, so they are much larger than a pollen molecule, but they are to scale. It's from a meadowsweet. Can't read my writing. There we go. Had to write them down so I didn't forget. This kind of wonky, flat one that, doesn't look so great. This is a willow pollen. And this big one here is from a plantain. So this is from one of our native grasses, plantain. I'm going to put these over here on the table for you all to look at here later. But pollen is all different shaped. And our native bees have specialized scopa, or those pollen-grabbing hairs, that allow them to maximize how much pollen they can pick up and take back to their hive to feed the young. Honeybees don't have that. Sorry, honeybees. Honeybees also have only one reproducing female, only the queen. If you're not the queen, you aren't laying eggs. So honeybees can be very susceptible to disease because they are all genetically the same. They're not coming from multiple females. That's why when colony collapse disorder came, that's why the honeybees suffered so much because they don't have a ton of genetic diversity. All the young are coming from one female, which, as we've seen in history across the world, bottlenecking of genes is not great for you in the long run. All right, so that's my honeybee tangent. I won't go on it anymore, but honeybees are the worst bee. We need to be protecting our native bees, planting for our native bees, and we'll learn more about that here in a moment. Our sweat bees, there's about 4,500, and they do get the name sweat bees because they love salty flavors. They love super sweet. They tend to go for the plants that produce the most sugar. So they're kind of like the junk food lovers of the bee world. They're gonna go for the sweetest plant you have. Some of them do come out at night, so you will see these guys flying a little bit later in the evening. We're gonna move right on. I've already been talking half an hour, oh my goodness. So Coletidae is our plaster and cellophane bees, mast bees, and forked tongue bees. These bees get their name plaster and cellophane or polyester bees because what they do is they nest underground like this. There's quite a few ground nesting bees, but they make these giant tunnels and then they only lay one egg in each tunnel. They leave the pollen mass there for the baby. And then towards the top of the tunnel, they close it off with a mouth secretion, essentially bee spit, and that dries and it looks like cellophane. It looks like clear plastic closing off the nest site of the bee. So that's how they got the name plaster and cellophane or polyester bee, because of that essentially filmy spit they use to close off their nest. Their scopa is on their hind legs, so when they carry pollen, you'll see them carrying it on their back legs. They love sandy soil, so if you've got soil that is kind of sandy and it's not as dense, that's what's going to really attract those guys. They're most active in the springtime, and they have very short lifespans. They may only live a month. So these guys are not around for very long. I just knocked I got too animated and knocked my thing off. Okay. Coletidae bees, uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Coletidae bees love flowers in the aster family, so things like your New England aster and your heath aster and your oil field aster and your zigzag aster and your purple stem aster. There's a whole calico aster, little white aster. There's a ton you can plant for them. They also love carrot and parsley flowers and anything in the pea or legume family. They're also really vital pollinators to that willow. So that willow pollen that I showed you all, a lot of times they'll have willow pollen on their legs because that's one of their favorite flowers to visit, are the flowers of willow trees. So you'll see them right now. The maple buds are starting to come out and the red buds are out now. So next time you see one of those red buds with the bright purple blooms, check it out and see if you see any of these little guys gathering pollen from those plants, because that's some of their favorite. Because they are active so early, they're some of our earlier rising bees. You see them out on those early blooming flowers. Our mining bees. These bees are so cute. Look at that bee. Look how cute he is. Now, this is a bee you can easily distinguish just by looks because in between their eyes, that's called their fovea, in between their eyes, there's this furry. So they have fur or fuzz, it's not true fur, they have fuzz between their eyes. So they have furry facial fovea, triple F, furry facial fovea, and that's all of our mining bees will have that little fuzzy face, which I think makes them look adorable. They have a scopae on all segments of their legs, so their legs will get covered in pollen. And they're also what's called oligolecti. Oligolecti means you have a very narrow preference of pollen, bless you, and depending on where you live, you probably only visit a few different species of flowers to gain all of your food. They're much more particular than some of our other bees.
Why do they have that fuzz?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the specific reasoning is for it. It probably has something to do with sensing. My guess is because they're mining bees and they're digging, they need to have some sort of protection for their eyes as they're digging down. So that's my best guess, and I think what scientists have also kind of come to the conclusion is that's sort of a way for them to judge depth and to keep their eyes protected as they're digging down into soils. My personal favorite, Megachilidae. These are our orchard, leafcutter, mason, carder, and resin bees. 4,000 species. Now, they also make the individual nest cells, much like our plaster bees did with the long tube and the one little egg in there. But these get their names because they close off those tubes with a wide range of substances. So if you are a leaf-cutting bee, you use leaves to block off the end of your nest tube. If you are a mason or an orchard bee, you use soil. If you are a carder bee, you use fibers and resins, and you generally collect those from soft plants like mulleins. Or if you are a resin bee, you're using plant sap to block off the ends of your nest tube. Their scopa is on their abdomen, so they can carry a lot more pollen because their abdomen is so much bigger than their legs. So they are excellent pollinators. This is our top family of pollinating bees because they can carry so much pollen at once. They also do a fun little bee wiggle dance that they do on flowers, which shakes up more pollen, which in turn then sticks to the scopa. So they're excellent pollinators. They get their name, Megachilidae. Megachile means large-lipped in Greek, and that's because their mandibles are bigger than other bees, and they're stronger because they're cutting through stuff like leaves, and they're carrying soils, and they've got plant sap in their jaws, so they've got very strong mandibles. This actually, I get leafcutter bees in my yard all the time. I have a fairly large pollinator garden, and I love going out to my garden and seeing my plants all chewed up by these guys. If your plants are not being eaten, they are not part of the ecosystem. You want to see your plants looking awful by the middle of summer, right? They're not supposed to look great because if they're being utilized by our native wildlife, they're gonna look like crap by July. Like, that's just how it is. So I love going out and seeing that half of my leaves have little holes in the side. The leafcutter bees make these perfect little half circles on the edges of leaves. They love lots of different families. Pea and legume family, rose and mint family, daisies and asters. Beard tongue is great for this family of bees. See, there's the little marks they make on your leaf. So it's really exciting when you go out and you see that all over your leaves. You know you've had leafcutter bees. But here's what it looks like. So if you've got leafcutter bees, they stick the leaves on the end. Mason bees are going to use mud. Carder bees use that fibrous stuff. And then masked bees or cellophane bees, it'll look like that. And then the resin bees are going to use that tree sap. So just by looking at the end of a bee tube, this is like if you have a solitary bee home or a bee box, it's going to look like that on the ends. And almost all of mine are leafcutter bees. But you can tell who's in there just by looking at the end. Yeah?
I have a question. Down at the level of the bee site, what does the pollen look like? Is it kernels? Is it little footballs? Or what?
It's all different. So every pollen is differently shaped. So it depends on what plant they're going to. Now, they're mostly going in and rubbing and collecting all of that pollen to take back to feed to the young bees. The adult bees themselves are mostly drinking the nectar as an energy source. The pollen is a food source for the young bees because pollen has a good amount of protein in it. Pollen is actually really good for us. You can buy bottles of pollen to put on top of like salads or food as like an extra protein source, and it's got a lot of great things in it for you. It doesn't taste like much, but it's an interesting addition to some of your foods to add that on there. All right, so quickly, native plants for bees. You always want to plant native plants. Decorative or ornamental plants are not good food sources. They're not recognized by native bees because the bees did not evolve with those plants. They do not recognize them as a food source. And also those plants don't have the same sugar and pollen content that they need for raising their babies and raising their young. So the pollen and nectar content is very different in plants that are not from here. Those plants are great where they come from for those bees, but not so much for ours. Fantastic plants for native bees are yellow, purple, and blue. Those are the bees' favorite colors. They will visit other flowers for sure, but because bees see in UV light, which most insects do, they see in reflection of UV, these are the most attractive and bright colors that are reflected to a bee's vision. Bee balm is excellent. Goldenrod, which is this one, is really great. Goldenrod also blooms really late into the season, so you're providing a food source well into October and sometimes even November. Lobelias, that top right one. Lobelia is great for our larger bees, like our the carder and the resin and the bumblebees. Because that folds down like a snapdragon almost, it's really hard for the little bees to get in there and spread them apart. Those flower petals really rely on the big fat bees to get in there and shove open their petals, because all flowers hide the nectaries in the back. And that's so that they ensure that the bee gets covered in its pollen first before getting to the nectary. So you'll always have the bee covered in pollen before they get to the nectary, and then they hit it again on their way out. So they're always digging towards the back to get to the nectary of the plant. And that one's a little more work. It requires the big, like, sturdy-bodied bees. We've also got asters. Asters have been mentioned a ton of times. So anytime you can plant a native aster, which is kind of daisy-like, it's a really pretty flower. And there's a ton of variety of them, size-wise, color-wise. Those are always a great choice. Coneflowers, really anything in the coneflower. So there's dwarf red, that's the purple coneflower, which is a naturalized coneflower. Any of the Susans are in that group too. So the black-eyed Susan, the brown-eyed Susan, the green-eyed Susan. There's a ton of Susans you can plant. The cutleaf coneflower. Indigos are great. Blazing star on the top left, that's going to attract bees, butterflies, hummingbirds. That's kind of good for everything that pollinates anything. So if you can only plant one, I tend to pick the blazing star. It also does pretty well in pots too. If you only have pots available and you don't have a big space, it tends to do well. Same with coneflowers, they tend to do well in a pot. Hyssop is one of my favorites. It smells like licorice. Always, always covered in bees and flies and beetles and all sorts of stuff. And any of the milkweeds too. Milkweed is not just for butterflies. Any questions? Yeah.
How do the bees get through a really harsh winter? Do they hibernate?
Yeah, bees are hibernators, so that's another reason why, oh, that moved. That's another reason why we say leave the leaves, because most bees are solitary and most are hibernating individually in things like leaf litter, curled up leaves. They're under bricks, they're under rocks, they're in logs, they're in hollowed out plant stems, so they're inside of your plant stems a lot. They will hibernate underground, in a wide range of places. So bees are hibernators. They spend the winter asleep, even the queens. Yeah.
How long will these bees last? One season, or I know?
About a season.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, they are not long lived. Most bees live less than like 5 months. Yeah. Pretty much just long enough to make a new generation. Yeah.
Where do wasps and hornets fit into this picture?
They're cousins. So they're not in any of these families. They've got their own families. Yep, they're cousins.
Are they pollinators too?
Yeah. Wasps, most wasps and, whoops, forgot that one, we'll do that one next. But most bees, wasps, all of those guys are very important pollinators too. Moths are pollinators, ants are pollinators, beetles are pollinators. So we think of pollinator and we think bee and butterfly, but really it's a huge gamut of creatures. Even bats. The bats we have here are not pollinators, but bats in like the American Southwest are pollinators. In the back.
Separate question.
Okay.
Do you have a degree in entomology or your background?
No, so I have an undergrad degree in biology and environmental studies, and then I have a master's in teaching.
My other question is this. You're talking about those killer bees.
Yep.
Now, they came up from Central America, Mexico. They're in the Southwest. Do they attack the hives and destroy the hives of these bees? Are they predatory to the native bees?
I'm not sure. I don't know a ton about killer bees. I don't think that they are, but I'm not sure. Most bees tend not to be predatory to other bees because they're after the nectar and the pollen. They're not predatory like a wasp is. A wasp, there are so many different like parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs specifically in other insects. I don't think there are any species of bee.
Now, when a bee stings you, it dies, right?
Some do, some don't. It depends on species. Yeah, some can sting as many times as they want, others will lose that stinger. Yeah, so it's species dependent. Yeah.
Queen bees, does every group of bees have one, or do they share, or what?
No, it's queen bees are specific to hives. So only, solitary bees do not have queens. If you're a solitary bee, all of your females are reproductive. If you are a hive bee, like a honeybee, then you have the one fertile queen and nobody else reproduces. But they do have one queen. If something happens to that queen and she dies, all of those bees will leave, do what's called swarming, and they will stay together as a group until they find a new queen. So honeybees don't have to live in a pre-built hive. We see this happening a lot sometimes in the woods where a queen will get out of the hive. She will take up residence in like a tree, and then you'll have a swarm of honeybees in that tree following that queen. And then normally like somebody gets called in to come scoop them up and like take them and put them in an actual hive because they're not native, so they shouldn't be doing that. But no, they only have the one queen. And if she dies, everyone's like, oh well, start over, and they go find another one. Yeah.
How often is a queen bee created? Is it a random act, or?
Yeah, so the bees that are produced will produce another generation of one queen, and she will replace that queen when the other queen passes.
Only one?
Just one, that's all they get. Yep.
One of the things that I've learned here is the fact that I think most people think that the honeybee is the one we gotta save.
Mm-hmm.
So really, that has to get out to more people, that the other bees.
I scream about it everywhere I go. Leave the honeybee alone.
Yeah, to me, that was very educational.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, no, we don't need to save that bee. We've domesticated that bee. It's like us being like, save the farm animals. Like, no, we don't need to do that. We raise them. We take care of them. We ship them around the world. Yeah.
I had a large nest of yellow jackets
Mhm.
last year. Somebody told me that they're gonna come back even though the nest is there. Is that relatively accurate?
I'm not sure too much about their biology. I don't think they have queens. They might come back because that is a good nesting spot, and anytime they can do less work, evolutionarily, less work means you live a little longer and you can produce stronger, healthier offspring. So if they find that, they will come back. So if you don't want them there, I'd fill it in. So they no longer see that and be like, wow, look at that hole, and help themselves to that again. Yeah. Yeah.
What is royal jelly?
I've heard of that, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think that's something the queen produces to feed the babies, but
No, that's what they feed the female bee to produce a queen.
some concoction. Yeah.
The works is produce the royal jelly, and that royal jelly allows that egg to become a
The
queen.
queen. So that's how they pick the queen. They pick an egg and be like, you're the one. Get the jelly. It's that one. Yeah.
One thing I found out, a blue jay will eat the wasp.
Blue jays will eat anything that fits in their beak.
Yeah. We had on our porch, and I was trying to kill him, then all of a sudden I saw this blue jay come in and just...
Blue jays do not care. There are birds, we don't have them here, but there are birds around the world called bee eaters that have beaks specifically shaped. They kind of make like a crosshatch almost. And they use that beak to grab a hold of bees. And they hold them in that crosshatch, and then they take them to a stone, and they will rub the stinger off on the stone and then eat them so they don't get stung. Yeah, there's a whole grouping of bee-eating bee birds. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
In Southeast Asia, on YouTube or whatever, you'll see these mountains that these guys will climb up, and they use smoke. They get these huge hives that have massive amounts of honey. Do you know anything about that particular type of bee?
It's probably the eastern honeybee.
It's a honey.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the honeybees if it's making honey, but it's probably the eastern honeybee, if depending on what part they're in. It could be the eastern or western.
Yeah, it would be in China.
That's probably the eastern one then. Yeah.
Yeah, some people will go to a beekeeper to get intentionally stung, perhaps as a treatment for arthritis or joints or
Yeah.
good science or.
Oh my gosh, there is so much fascinating science around animal venom. There's a really great book, and I wish I could remember who wrote it, but the book is called Venomous, and it's all about the research behind animal venoms, because it's a venom, is what it is. It's a venom. Anything actively injected into you is a venom. If you drink it, like, you have to drink it for it to be a poison. Poison works on a very different system than venom. Poison works on your mucous membranes in your stomach. Venom works through your bloodstream. So anything that's injected is a venom, but some of the fascinating science behind it, they're researching cobra venoms for Alzheimer's and things like that. There has been a lot of research around rattlesnakes on breast cancer because one of the enzymes in rattlesnake venom reverts cells to harmless cells. And they're looking at that for cancer research. Can we use the venom from a snake to revert cancer cells to harmless cells again? Gila monster venom is used in Viagra. There is one of our blood pressure medicines, which I take a blood pressure pill, is derived from an animal venom as well. It's one of the snakes. I forget what snake it is. But it's fascinating. And there are studies, so bee venom is really closely related to centipede venom. So if you are allergic to bees, be careful around centipedes because their venoms are incredibly similarly built, so you could have a reaction to them too. But they're looking at that as like a chronic pain management. Yeah, for Alzheimer's and things like Lyme's disease that causes joint pain, fibromyalgia. Yeah, but I highly recommend that book, Venomous. It's really fascinating, some of the stuff going on that's being researched through animal venoms and toxins, toxicology. Yeah.
If we're done with bees, could I change the subject?
Sure.
Could you tell us about lanternflies?
So lanternflies haven't been here long enough for us to have a truly well-built plan to know exactly the damage they're causing. We know they're awful for grapes and the wine industry. They're destroying grapevines. From a forest perspective, we don't know yet. We don't know yet what the damage to a forest is because a lanternfly's preferred host plant is tree of heaven, which is also invasive. So sure, kill all of those you want. Like, what do we care if like the lanternflies come over and annihilate tree of heaven? We don't want that tree anyway. So really, we're gonna have to wait to see what percentage damage they're doing. Like, how often are they using the tree of heaven as a host versus other plants before we really know the true economic damage? But they're not great. They're leaf hoppers, so they're a pain to squish because they jump as soon as you get near them. Their honeydew is bad. Honeydew is like a waste product that can cause specific tree death if it builds up around the roots. Some people eat the honeydew, which I will not be participating in, but they make like honeys and jellies out of it, which is anything that's a waste product I immediately do not want to eat. I don't care what it is a waste of, I'm not eating it. Yeah.
The huge hanging, whatever it is, from trees, what kind of a bee?
Bald-faced hornet is usually those guys. They are big, and they're black and yellow, and they have a distinct, like, yellow face, and then it's black all around. That's usually those guys, yep.
Does the Allegheny Land Trust do anything specific against invasive plants?
Plants? We try. It's really hard with 4,000 acres because we try not to spray as much as we can. So we definitely go out. We have invasive pools. We pull garlic mustard. We pull bittersweet. We pull oh my gosh, the knotweed. We have so much knotweed in places, and yeah, the bittersweet is bad. We have Aurelia in one of the locations, so we kind of get the gauntlet of them, and it's very time intensive to do it if you're not going to spray. So we really rely on like volunteer events to go out and pull some of that stuff. We've done what's called hack and squirt. If we're gonna spray things where we individually cut and then individually apply the toxin to that one plant so that it doesn't affect anything else, so that it stays specifically with that plant root system. But we try. It's an ongoing battle. The problem with invasives is they do not care where they grow, and they will grow in a wide variety of places. They spread like crazy. They make a ton of seeds. So if you can't get out there and deal with it before it produces seeds, then there's 1,000 more next year, you know? So it's an always ongoing battle, but we're always yanking some kind of invasive, that's for sure. Yeah.
Are you involved academically? I mean, maybe have a study or two going on? Is that what you do?
No, I do stuff like this. I'm not a researcher. I don't have a whole lot of interest in research. That's why I didn't get my master's in like anything research-based. But no, I go out and teach a wide range of topics, anything from sustainability to bees to. I do a once-a-month free webinar with ALT that is similar to this, where you can log on and learn about something different every month. So we've got those every month. Next week is our April one, and I'm talking about using iNaturalist for biodiversity, which is an app. And then May will be mosquitoes. So if you want to learn about mosquitoes and how they're helpful and harmful, that'll be in May. June is another bee talk, because there's a pollinator week in June, so we'll be having a pollinator walk and a pollinator talk. May 20th is World Bee Day, and if you go up to our Audubon Greenway property, we're going to be making bee boxes to give out. So you have to go online and register for that, so I know how much stuff to buy. But we'll be making bee boxes. Yeah.
Do you go and talk to garden clubs?
Yeah, I'm doing one next week. Or 2 weeks. 2 weeks, yeah. We do a lot of garden clubs. We've done like the Allegheny Garden Club. I'm going to Green Tree Garden Club, I think, in a couple weeks. Yeah, we go. Well, anyone who wants us to talk, we'll talk to. Yeah.
Where is your most recent land acquisition for the Allegheny Land Trust?
Last Friday, we closed on a property along the Panhandle Trail out by the airport area. So that was just last week.
Now, do you guys work with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and Hollow Oak Land Trusts, and how do you go about your acquisitions?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the middle. We're bigger than Hollow Oak, but much smaller than Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. Western Pennsylvania Conservancy does like the middle of the state over, and they're able to take on much, much larger projects like Falling Water and the grounds around Falling Water. And they are very research based. They have a whole team of like ologists, like ornithologists, entomologists that go out and do research on properties. But we do projects with them. We don't co-own. We might own an easement on something, but we don't tend to co-own anything. Hollow Oak is generally in a fairly smaller area, so anything that's in there we will send to them or ask them if they need help with it. In WPC, anything that's like out of our range of capacity scope-wise, we'll send to them. So we work together in that way. Yeah.
Where do the old bees go when they die? Is there like a graveyard?
Well, they don't get to stay in the hive, that's for sure. Dead bees can carry disease and can be problematic, and they take up space and they're not contributing. So if they die in the hive, the bees will actually cart them out and dispose of their carcass outside of the hive. So right outside the hive, there is sometimes a pile of dead bees. But when they die in nature, just like any animal, it's wherever. They just kind of broke. They die where they die. They probably get eaten by something, circle of life. But yeah, sometimes there's a pile of carcasses right outside the hive of anyone who's died in the hive gets taken out. You don't get to junk up the hive with your carcass after you die if you're a bee. Yeah, right to the curb. Don't even get cold. All right.
Okay, any other questions for Julie?
Yep.
Julie, do you have any?
No, but I always end with a funny picture.
Okay.
A politician. But
Julie, thank you very much. Great presentation.